Howdy folks, Spencer here, and today I want to talk about the Vanguard Specialist trait that is coming with the Legendary Bug Ship. If you watched my video yesterday, or pretty much any other video on the Legendary Bug Ship, you will know that it had received some criticism at just how ineffective the trait was. To summarize the trait, there's a meme that Dilazerk put out on the STO subreddit, and basically, if you had any cooldown reduction methods on your build already, like Photonic Officer, Oxtabat, or the Boimler effect, the trait effectively did nothing for you because the trait was doing what those abilities already do for you, but only for those 5 specific specialization abilities. So the original implementation of the trait was not good, and Cryptic has acknowledge this. In fact, Bordicus, in response to the criticism the trait has received, has went through. He has now done some play testing on his own, and he came to the same conclusion that most of us had, that the trait did nothing. So Bordicus has went through, and he's already made some changes internally that the trait will now also extend the duration of the 5 listed abilities by 5 seconds. So this trait went from being completely worthless to now actually being viable as an extension method for those abilities. So I have a spreadsheet here showing at the bottom left is with the cooldown of those abilities without having the trait slotted at all. The top left is the original implementation of the trait, and the top right is the implementation of the trait now with the changes that Bordicus has just made today. So you can see, comparing the top left and bottom left, that the actual uptime on the abilities doesn't change, and that was because the original implementation of the trait did nothing to reduce the global cooldown of the abilities or to improve the duration of them. So the original implementation, as we talked about yesterday, did absolutely nothing, and it was as intended, or as originally intended, the trait would have done nothing. So with the revamp now, the trait adds that 5 seconds to the duration, which means that we now have a massive improvement to the uptime as shown at the top right here. Surgical strikes, reroute reserves to weapons, and exceed rated limits go from having 67% uptime to 100%. This is if you've used Beam Overload before and you have Super Weapon Ingenuity on from the Zindi Adalith. This trait is doing the same thing for these 3 abilities as Super Weapon Ingenuity does for Beam Overload. So if you want to run Surgical Strikes, reroute reserves to weapons, or exceed rated limits and have 100% uptime, you have to have this trait slotted. For Suppression Barrage, those of you look at here may have noticed it will now have 125% uptime. So I'm not sure how this is going to work because we already had 100% uptime with this ability. My thoughts are either it's going to just not let you hit the next copy of Suppression Barrage until the first one is ended, or it will let you stack them and you'll have 5 seconds where you have 2 stacks of Suppression Barrage. So we'll have to wait and see how that ends up, but that is something to keep an eye out for. For recursive shearing, this will extend the uptime of recursive from 5 seconds to 10 seconds. And for those of you that have never used recursive shearing before, recursive shearing is a temporal ability that you mark on a target, and it takes up to 30% of the damage you do to that target from you and your team over the 5 seconds or now 10 seconds, and it gives you 30% additional at the end of that period. So the issue with it as is, even at 5 seconds, was that a lot of targets just don't stay alive that long. And that's an additional concern now with double the duration of, what targets in your queues are staying alive for 10 seconds. If you're not playing Elite, it's really not many. So Bordicus has also addressed this over on Reddit, and Bordicus says that he's going to potentially look at doing a reevaluation of recursive shearing, and he's thinking about rebuilding it to make it work like the Agony Redistributor console that came off the Terran Adamant, where instead of looking at the total duration over the 5 or 10 seconds, it'll just check each single second and distribute the damage after that second. So if you do 2 million damage after the or 2 million damage in the first second, it'll deal 600k in the second, and then so on and so on. It'll just distribute the damage and do it each second rather than waiting the 5 or 10 seconds. So if we get that change, that's going to be really nice for the recursive shearing. But, you know, overall, I think that the changes made to this trait change it from being, you know, one that you could completely avoid to one that I think a lot of people now are going to want to get. I think when this goes live, I'm going to do some testing over on the triple test map to compare a beam overload versus rapid fire versus surgical strikes, and reroute reserves to weapons that exceed rated limits. I want to see just how each of them will perform given comparable builds and in a long duration environment where I just have an auto clicker, like spam my spam bar over on the triple test map for like 15 minutes just to see how each ability performs compared to the others. So I think surgical strikes is probably, it has potential to very, very well compete against beam overload, or potentially even beat beam overload with these changes and the other recent buffs that surgical strikes have got. So if you're a beam overload fan, you might want to start looking at what ships you have that can run surgical strikes, because surgical strikes, I think, just really popped back up into the meta there for single target builds. But overall, I think that this is worth, it makes the pack even more worth getting now. The value of this at $45 during the initial sale is still really high. And I do need to remember to mention here, these changes to the trait, Borticus just added them in today. So with their version control, there is a chance that the changes made today may not go live and be live with the ship when it initially comes out. So do not be surprised if the trait that releases on Thursday is the original implementation of the trait, but in probably the patch immediately afterwards, the next week or the next day or whenever, the changes will be live and it will add the extended duration to those abilities also. So don't be surprised if you see the trait being bad on the first day. That is just because the changes were made late into the development cycle and may have been too late to be added to this upcoming Thursday release. So that is it for today. Once again, thank you to all of you that have become channel members, Patreon members, and Twitch subs. I will be streaming the day this Jem'hadar ship comes out. We'll do some testing. If the trait is the new version upon release, then, you know, I'll definitely be messing around with it a bit. Might mess around with the surgical strikes build. I haven't messed around with that in quite a long time, so we'll have to see. But that is it for today. Thanks for watching. See you all next time.